Africa Climate Summit enters day 2 today at the KICC as activists stage street demonstrations to protest against too much talk with no action.
And across the borders, General Brice Nguema, leader of Gabon's military junta that toppled President Ali Bongo, sworn in as interim president and promises to return power to civilians after free, transparent elections.
In sports, Manchester United winger Anthony dropped from the Brazilian national football team following allegations of abuse by his former girlfriend. Good morning and welcome to this edition of Morning Cafe. Yes, it is getting warmer and warmer in Nairobi. I don't know how many degrees Celsius it is today, but the coffee is quite hot, as always, the way we serve it. But curiously, that last highlight about what's happening to young football players, especially in Manchester United, I don't know what's happening. It happened to Mason Green.
Oh, yes.
But it is very sad that they're always accused of these actions by their girlfriends. Makes you wonder. This guy is only 23 years old.
Oh, yes. So out here, just be safe.
Oh, yes.
Be safe who you are. But then, speaking of matters being safe, the 5th day of September, it is the second day of the Africa Climate Summit. Yesterday, we did quite see a lot and a number of speeches inside the stage and inside the podium. And just outside, people who actually know about this particular summit, well, others were trying to bite their tongues, figuring out what actually is climate action and the kind of steps to actually take when it comes to climate action. But be it as it may, this particular morning we discuss matters climate action and the kind of steps that we should really be taking, even as the government really says a number of things, planting billions of trees, having more dams. So how do we actually ensure that we do have climate action?
Well, to the top story now, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres will hold a press conference at the Shimba Hills Hall at the KICC first floor this morning, starting 11 a.m. He's expected to make some serious announcement there. The press conference follows the UN Secretary General's participation at the high-level opening of the Climate Summit from 9 a.m. The summit is co-hosted by the Government of Kenya and the African Union and is taking place starting yesterday all the way to tomorrow. The theme is driving green growth and climate finance solutions for Africa and the world. And this will be our main discussion throughout our broadcast today. Let's now get the day's diary before we take a look at the dailies.
Right, Fred, and just a mention of today's diary, really a lot is actually centered on the Climate Summit. A number of sideline events happening. Now, apart from the main event happening at the Kenyatta International Convention Center, others are happening around Safari Park and other areas in Nairobi. And as Fred had mentioned, we do expect to see UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres holding a press conference today. Also, we do expect the COP28 president-designate, that is Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, expected to make a significant climate finance announcement today. And also, we do expect to see the U.S. Special Envoy on Climate, John Kerry. Well, apart from that, did you know that today is International Day of Charity? So do give as it may. After this, I'll do ask Fred to buy me breakfast, hopefully at Takata, because today is International Day of Charity.
I won't do it as charity because I'll expect you to buy me back breakfast tomorrow if I do it. Anyway.
Well, that is the diary. Will definitely be updating it as we do continue with the show. But then from the diary to the dailies this morning, and Fred, the dailies this morning, it is the grand entrance of the president into
Yes.
KICC.
Matters Climate Summit, that's the headline on the Daily Nation. Africa's moment. The biggest gathering on climate, Africa speaks with one voice, calling for action rather than empty talk and promises, as hundreds of millions across the continent bear the brunt of what scientists have called the biggest catastrophe of our times. And yes, as we said earlier, this is the main focus for everyone. And you can see that with the kind of coverage by the Daily Nation. Pages 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 dedicated solely to the Africa Climate Summit. Quite a number of speakers yesterday. Mr. John Kerry, U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, Ms. Soipan Tuya, Environment Cabinet Secretary, Kenya, Mr. Mithika Mwenda, Executive Director, PACJA, and President Ruto as well. And yes, this photo of the president walking at the KICC towards the main event alongside Sierra Leone President Julius Maada and the Deputy President. I think that's the same photo used on other dailies as well. But still on the front page of the Daily Nation, away from Matters Climate, on the top strip, makes mention of two other stories away from the climate discussion. Amadi, accused of meddling in fake gold case. Dubai-based firm claims senior judicial officers pushing to have case dismissed. That story on page 12. Another highlight, farms surrender 3 grabbed islands in Kwale. EACC to file a recovery suit for a 4th. Wow, you know, we talk about grabbed plots. These ones are grabbing islands. Yes. On the back page of the Daily Nation, bill seeks to create a sugar board and impose strict import rules. Proposed law wants more funding for research to improve sugarcane production in the country. And it's interesting that matters sugar are still a big discussion following that trip to Western region by the president and some of the pronouncements that he made there, including that famous now quip of Mambo de Matatu. Players in the industry say it has been neglected since it was put under AFA. Talking about far-reaching reforms. Still on the back page of the Daily Nation today, KPA defends higher charges it imposed on Joho Family Company. These companies are Portside Freight Terminals Limited, a company associated with the family of former Mombasa Governor Hassan Joho. And those are the main stories on the Daily Nation today.
Right, let's go over to now the Standard as we scroll with you. Well, not the same picture actually, it's a different one, but then as you are now getting closer, well, I mean, okay, for the Standard, Sierra Leone president isn't there. Right there we can see President William Ruto with President Julius Maada actually he's Sierra Leone, and other leaders at KICC, including the Deputy President. There's a quote there, an opportunity-oriented focus on climate action is the engine for propelling Africa into a realm of stability and prosperity, elevating us to middle-income status and beyond. So Ruto leads onslaught against the big boys. Also, the Standard has dedicated a number of acres in this paper from page 2 all the way to page 8. Africa needs to take charge of its destiny was the message that speakers put across on day 1 of the Africa Climate Summit, with a call to have visa-free borders and have a single currency for trade. Right, away from that, on the right strip of the Standard, banks fear more than half debtors will default. Central bank surveys show a majority of those likely to fail to pay their loans for more than 3 months are individuals and traders. That is on page 3, the bottom there. Still on the right strip, EU law change pushing oil companies to Africa on page 6. Now to the top strip of the Standard, Ministry pushing for KRA to waive universities' debt is in matters education and higher education on page 11. Across the borders on the world page 27, fuel price trims jams in Nigeria. And in matters sports, Ateta cooking rice to deliver at top level. I love that. An interesting headline there. Rice definitely cooked us. Ateta definitely cooked us the day before.
You're still reeling from that shock defeat.
Well, I mean, the kind of fitness I was doing yesterday eased that, all that. So the back page has dedicated all that. And I'm pretty sure Fred will be very interested in reading all of that. On the back page of the Standard.
Oh, the sports pages.
Oh, yes.
Let's move on now to the People Daily. And the People Daily does the same, goes with climate change. Counties get 44 billion shillings boost. That's the front page of the People Daily today. Talks bearing dividend. First ever Africa Summit opens with pledge to fund devolved government's climate action. As 7 billion shillings released. Also, the People Daily has dedicated quite some coverage to this discussion. Pages 4, 7, 10, 11 and 14. This story also breaks down who has given what. The World Bank has given 22.5 billion shillings, Danida 13.4, KFW 5 billion, CEDA 2.1 billion, and the Netherlands 1.5 billion shillings. So yes, goodies already coming in from the summit. And yes, the same kind of photo, at least same composition, the entry of President William Ruto to the KICC accompanied by Sierra Leone President Julius Maada yesterday. And that is the same picture or same composition of photo at least for the 3 dailies that we've looked at so far. Away from matters climate, other stories making it to the front page of the People Daily on the top strip. Rule change opens door for tech giants. Removal of 30% ownership law paves way for Amazon, Microsoft entry. That story is on page 15. Other highlights, when job loss leads to success, and it's on page 25 of the People Daily. And that's the front page of the People Daily today.
Right, from the People Daily to the Star this morning. And the Star, well, doesn't really go with the whole picture, pardon me, of the grand entrance into KICC. But it writes, Ruto, welcome to the future. Donning the green regalia, matters wildlife. So ambitions, no time to catalogue grievances, problems, but rather to unlock solutions. Away from that, Kidero off the hook as he settles 427 million Kenyan shillings tax dispute with the KRA. The bottom strip there matters appeal after appeal and rest of cult leader is on the Star this morning. I can definitely also take a look at Business Daily before we cross over to Taifa Leo. On the Business Daily, listen to this story. 60% of small businesses can't repay their loans. So defaults linked to interest rate spikes and female-owned enterprises hit hard. There's a number there, 42.8%. So this is the proportion of small businesses that defaulted on loans in October last year, 2022. On the left strip of the Business Daily, 10 firms joined the battle for betting billions. And the bottom strip there, smiling and actually laughing president, together with the Africa Development President, Adesia. And it says Ruto unlocked 7.3 billion Kenyan shillings climate grants for counties. Quite an interesting conversation there, devolving the climate action. On the right strip of Business Daily, matters IMF to review 80.2 billion climate-linked loan in November. And Safaricom signs a 15 billion shillings loan deal with lenders for growth. And finally, foreigners buy 668 million NSE shares in August. That is on the Business Daily.
Okay. Tuangalie jarida la Taifa Leo. Na Taifa Leo, the main headline, yuko katika giza, totally different tangent away from the climate issues, masuala ya siasa. Hatima, iwapo kiti cha kiongozi rasmi wa upinzani na naibu wake kitabuniwa, huenda Raila akachukua kimoja na kumpa Kalonzo kingine, hasa baada ya kumtwika Musyoka jukumu la kuongoza Azimio kwenye majadiliano ya Kenya Kwanza. Hadithi hiyo ama habari hiyo iko kwenye ukurasa wa pili wa Taifa Leo. Mazungumzo ya mapatano hayana nafasi bayana kwake, na kwake tunadhania ni yule ambaye yuko kwenye picha hapa, kiongozi wa chama cha NARC Kenya, Martha Karua. Kalonzo aonekana kupendelewa, so Martha Karua yuko katika giza? Wanauliza, hilo ni swali. Bado katika ukurasa wa mbele wa Taifa Leo, Kidero sasa yuko huru. KRA yamwondolea kesi ya ushuru inayohusisha zaidi ya milioni 400. Milioni 400 ndio nukta 4 ya bilioni. Yes, iliyokuwa mahakamani. Kwingineko, Malala baraza wazika tofauti. Katibu mkuu wa chama cha UDA na gavana wa Kakamega watangaza kuepuka uhasama na kupigania ustawi. Habari hiyo kwenye ukurasa wa 4. Pale chini kwenye ukurasa wa mbele wa Taifa Leo, Wetangula atetea mambo ni tatu. Adai rais hakukusudia kuwaua wafisadi wanaofilisisha taifa hili kwa kusema kauli yake maarufu. Kwingineko, deni la bilioni 117 la sekta ya sukari kufutwa. Serikali yaanza mchakato wa kuondolea viwanda vya sukari mzigo wa kifedha. It's also the story that was featured on the back page of the Daily Nation. Matters to do with the reforms in the sugar sector. And of course, for people in Western Kenya, that's a big story. Kwenye mambo ya michezo, wikendi ya matatu EPL. Mbali na Arsenal, pia Liverpool, Crystal Palace na Brighton zilipata ushindi wa mabao 3 kila moja. Hadithi hiyo kwa ukurasa wa 20 kwenye Taifa Leo. Pale juu kwenye ukurasa wa mbele wa Taifa Leo, hafla ya hali ya hewa Afrika, mambo ya climate change, at least getting some coverage there on the front page of Taifa Leo. Mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, pesa nzito ya mwagika, mataifa yenye utajiri yatoa huku mengine yakiahidi matrilioni ya pesa kukabili madhara ya hali ya hewa. Na habari hiyo iko kwenye ukurasa wa 5 wa Taifa Leo.
And it's interesting, even as we cross over to other dailies, remember while Ruto was in France, speaking in France earlier this year, he was largely talking about how richer countries should actually pay their dues. So maybe this is a show of it. And but we're interested to see how this particular monies will be used.
Well, I can tell you one thing. This is a perfect opportunity for African countries to actually demand that richer countries who are to blame for the biggest problem when it comes to
loss and damage
pollution of the environment.
Pollution,
given the level of industrialization, really need to pay up because Africa is doing the opposite. We're trying to mitigate this, and at least in terms of equity, they need to pay up. So there could be some good money coming our way, at least towards African countries, and that's a big discussion. But how this money is actually made to trickle down to the community is where the disconnect is, and probably where the youth and other entrepreneurs should come in. So we now cross over tuvuke boda.
Tuvuke boda katika in Daily Monitor now, in Uganda. So Daily Monitor goes with Uganda passport fraud nightmare in East Asia. Let me give you some details here. So it's a dilemma, according to the Daily Monitor. So due to increased forgeries of the Ugandan passport, many travelers have either been subjected to overly strict scrutiny by immigration officials or denied entry into China, India, Singapore, among other East Asian countries. That story is extensive from page 4 to 5. And well, they have photos of the Karamoja dancers dancing to their tunes, back to the roots. Karamoja annual cultural show starts. On the right strip of the Daily Monitor, security forces recover more bombs in Kampala. So the security services say an ongoing counter-terror operation has, in the last 48 hours, led to the recovery of 6 bombs from locations around Kampala. And still in matters security, police caution Bobi Wine on following rules. Okay, I don't know if you'll actually follow them. I mean, Bobi Wine and the police definitely have a very interesting kind of relation. On the top strip of the Daily Monitor, they also mention the climate talks happening here in Nairobi. Pomp color warnings as world leaders meet for climate talks. So in a brief, the Daily Monitor says in the largest gathering on climate, Africa speaks with one voice, calling for action rather than empty talk and promises, as hundreds of millions across the continent bear the brunt of what scientists have called the biggest catastrophe of our times. That is, in a brief, what is on the Daily Monitor.
And at least the Daily Monitor makes a reference to the Africa Climate Summit.
Oh, yes.
Mwananchi in Tanzania, tuvuke boda tuende Tanzania. Mwananchi haina mention pale.
Hajataja yote.
Hajataja kweli. Pale Mwananchi, the main headline, Samia, nataka msimamie haki. Haya ni maagizo ya Rais Samia kwa jeshi la polisi kuhusu chaguzi zijazo. Awapiga kijembe kulea vitambi, akiri rushwa, bado tatizo barabarani, kutazama upya kikokotoo. Well, okay. And the uniform is quite interesting. You've seen.
Oh, yes. It's always interesting. For Mwananchi, 3/4 of the time that you're reviewing it, it always has a mention of Samia Suluhu every, most of the time.
Yes. But yet, even in Kenya, you know, our president, you look at the headlines and it's always Ruto or Raila sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
But more and more, as we continue now, the president's name is featuring on the dailies, almost on a daily.
Well, okay.
That was a rhyme.
Right.
Yeah, so yes, interesting photo there of the president of Tanzania talking to the police about the upcoming elections. Masuala mengine yaliyo kwenye ukurasa wa mbele wa Mwananchi, mifumo ya tajwa teua tengua ya vigogo nchini, hapo ni pale juu kwenye jarida la Mwananchi. Na maumivu ya mafuta, Ewura ya washushia rungu wanayoyaficha. He's talking about those hoarding fuel. And that's Ewura should be the equivalent of Kenya's EPRA. And those are the main stories on the front page of Mwananchi in Tanzania today.
And actually what is happening on the right, rather top strip of Mwananchi mentioned also now reflects largely on the Citizen in Tanzania, where the Citizen says, crackdown on fuel hoarders. So the Energy and Water Utilities Regulatory Authority, now that is the Ewura, Energy and Water Utilities Regulatory Authority, has put 3 fuel filling stations on suspicion and another 16 under investigation for illegal trading practices, including hoarding. That story is on page 3 of The Citizen this morning. On the right strip there, you can have it. Contracts worth 7.5 trillion signed in 5 years, and also expectations high as AGRF kicks off in Dar. And young writer inspired by President Samia.
And you know, when you mention any figure, especially when it comes to money, on any Tanzanian page, because it's still the shilling, people really need to understand that these are Tanzanian
shillings, yes.
Because they're talking about 17.5 trillion shillings. If that was Kenyan money, even our economy is not that big. Well, interesting.
Right, now to the caricature this morning. And on our caricature this morning for the Standard, page 16, ladies and gentlemen. And can see it goes with matters, some international news. And on the Daily Nation, let me see if I can, oh yes, on page 17, speaks largely on matters climate change. But let's start across the borders before we actually come to Kenya. So on page 16 of the Standard this morning, how's there? West Africa, people voting. And, you know, they're quite shocked actually. There's a gentleman there inside that. What's the name of that tanker?
The tank.
Yeah. Oh yes, basically a tanker, and it seems that it has already fired smoke billowing out of it, and people are actually voting. I believe now, Fred, you can do the honors today.
We're looking at the Standard?
Oh yes, the Standard. You can see the vote is there, and actually speaks largely in what is happening in West Africa, the coup d'etat happening there. Yesterday we did see the new president being sworn in for Gabon, Brice Nguema, who's the leader of Gabon's military junta. Thank you, Fred.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Okay, all right. So that's what's in the Standard this morning.
Yes.
Now on the Daily Nation, you remember that yellow car that the president was driving in on Sunday, drove from State House to KICC. We also saw him yesterday with it. Speaks largely here on matters electric vehicles.
Well, I saw a video of quite a number of these electric buses, electric passenger buses, quite a number of them. Actually, more than 50 of them were driving around the city. I'm hoping it's not just to create a spectacle around the African Climate Summit, but that they will actually continue operating well beyond the end of the summit this week.
Oh, yes. And actually, if you ask me, it brings a whole picture even to those who are visiting. Maybe, they're walking around and they're seeing a number of these electric vehicles, and the message they have when they go back is that, well, Kenya is actually filled with, electric vehicles out here. Well, Kenya is quite big in electric mobility. I don't know how that now reflects.
I think we are a bit ahead of other African nations in this. Well, we've always been very fast in adopting new technology, so it's not really surprising. But the cartoon on the Daily Nation actually paints a picture of how on one hand, we are adopting new technology with the electric vehicles, but we're still dumping a lot of waste, including e-waste, which still contributes to matters climate change. And you see, it appears that our understanding of the whole issue is not wholesome. It's not 360. We just think it's one way. Once we adopt this new technology, then everything is sorted.
It matters the mobility, then we'll be fine.
Yet some practices, very harmful practices to the environment as well, we still continue, like dumping of waste haphazardly, especially e-waste, electronic waste, which we have a lot of. And the question, how many phones have you dumped? How did you dispose of your last phone? I'm sure it's just somewhere in your house sitting.
Well, this is my first phone, actually.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. It has survived for years, for many years.
Your first phone ever?
Oh, yes. Oh, okay, my second, but I gave the other one away.
Well, you only turned 18
come on.
last year, so it's understandable. Well, that is it for the dailies this morning. Remember, today the big focus is on the climate summit, so even the discussions throughout this broadcast will be around the same. Today, let me just have this image here. Today, on the big discussion, we'll be having Benson Ochieng, climate law and policy expert, John Kioli, chairperson, Kenya Climate Change Working Group, and Senator Esther Okenyuri on the panel. Do stand by for that conversation, mainly to do with climate change. You've seen that video of the Mumias East MP, Peter Salasya, talking about
biting his tongue, trying to explain what climate change is.
And I know that people are making fun of that MP, but the question is, how many of us can really explain matters to do with climate change or climate action and what exactly is going on at the KICC? So the experts who will be on the panel today will be helping us understand this issue much better, so that we know, even for the young people, where are we supposed to plug in when it comes to discussions or the debate around climate action. That after the break.
And actually, I mean, even as we continue, it's pertinent to remind our viewers that we'll be getting live pictures from KICC. My team is definitely there. But then I'm quite seeing a developing story here of Field Marshal Muthoni Kirima. Should we update our viewers after the break?
Oh, well, sure. After the break, we'll have that update as well as a big discussion. Don't go too far. You're watching Morning Cafe. be a lot of Kenyans, a huge population of our country is averse to such debates, that not very many people really understand what climate action is, what climate change is all about, and where we all come in. We are happy that we have a lot of guests, over 30,000 delegates attending the summit, 24 heads of states and government. And yes, it's good for the host country and our city, Nairobi, but beyond that, Benson, Climate Change 101, and let's start from there, even before we continue with where Kenyans can actually plug in.
Well, thanks a lot, Fred. It's a pleasure to be here. I think it's an interesting place to start. A member of parliament trying to explain in simple terms what climate change is about. Credit to him. I think he did at least communicate something, and basically he was talking about the dangers and challenges we are facing as a community, as people of this world, in light of or in the face of climate change. Back to basics, as you say, 101. The basic scientific idea is that when we undertake human activities, underline human activities, there is always an effect, cause and effect, and every activity has potential to generate greenhouse gases. Now, to be very plain, greenhouse gases are basically gases that are emitted from human activities, and the ones we call greenhouse gases are those that have got the potential to cause global warming. So that is the starting point. What happens with greenhouse gases is that when they are emitted into the atmosphere from human activities, say driving, say tilling the land, say cutting down forests, and all those other activities that we undertake, engineering, production, normal production systems in the factories, we produce those gases. They go into the atmosphere. They act as a blanket by covering the surface of the earth. So just imagine a blanket around the earth, which is formed by these gases. And the science around it is that when the sun rays are hitting the earth's surface, they come in form of infrared rays. And when they leave in another wavelength that is ultraviolet. And so when the blanket is formed around the earth because of these gases, they are in the atmosphere, they have the effect of causing heating or warming, simply because it is like a blanket that is covering a fire or some heat. That is what we call climate change. It is a change that has happened over a long period of time because of the effect, constant effect of global warming, because there is a greenhouse gas blanket around the Earth's surface.
Okay.
So essentially that is the science behind it. When that happens over time, because we are generating these gases, greenhouse gases, then they form that blanket, and over time they cause overall change in the global temperatures, rainfall patterns, wind patterns, all of that, which then we call climate change, and is of an average of about 30 to 50 years. When that occurs, then we say climate has changed, hence climate change.
Okay. At least now you get you now have a basic understanding of what climate change is all about and global warming. But where this Africa Climate Summit comes in and the demand for money and where that money goes, we'll be discussing that as well. But before that, and before we even get Senator Okenyuri to talk to us about this, let's get this video where Peter Salasia, the MP for Mumias East, was speaking, so that we can understand where he was coming from.
Mheshimiwa, welcome to SPM Bus. We all aware is that it's climate change, yeah, right? Because you feel like, by the way, climate change is real because of the global warming. I think I was in Mombasa last week and it was so cold. So I asked them, what's not happening? They told me it's because of ati ice, ati jua imekuwa mingi, ice ina melt, ikisha melt, so nini inakuwa baridi. So global climate is real, and whatever people are going to be told here, if they're going to implement, well, for the sake of the country.
You as Mheshimiwa, how are you championing for climate change?
Okay, climate change, we have, like we know, we are a representative of the rural constituencies. And now being from the rural constituencies, they use most of the time kuni, and now we are advocating for use coco chico and other things like those ones. Gas, hizo za, hizo ndio vitu tuna, but now because again another challenge is hawana pesa ya kununua, so ndio unapata like it's becoming a challenge, but we are hoping the government will come up with measures on how venye wamesema wanataka kureduce your tax ya nini gas itasaidia.
Do you have maybe a proposed plan maybe to help government campaign for the Africa climate change?
Okay, we are going to submit. We are going to submit. We have a plan. Youth in my constituency have the proposals. They are very creative. So we are going to forward for them and see how they can be funded and implement.
Tumeona rais wetu aliweza kuendesha gari electrical car. Maybe moving forward, are you planning maybe to buy one maybe so that you can use it?
Nikipata nanunua. Nikipata nanunua ya stima. Natafuta.
All right. Shukran sana Mheshimiwa.
Asante.
Yes, that's the MP Mumias East, Peter Salasia, giving his sentiments on what's happening at the Africa Climate Summit. Senator, from what Benson has explained to us, Salasia was not really off. His explanation, at least to some extent, has a good understanding of what the issues are. But the kind of criticism that he has received from the comments he made speaks a lot to even the level of understanding of the Kenyans themselves. Do we really know what you're talking about?
What you're actually saying is true, and I think it's a section that is actually criticizing him, a section that I would call the elite people. But ordinary Kenyans actually do not get this conversation. And the honorable member there represents the large Kenyan population that is yet to pick how vital the issues of climate change are, Fred. I know Kenya is largely reliant on tourism and agriculture. These two are susceptible to climate change and the harsh weather conditions that we are talking about this morning. And as a result, we are seeing this Africa Climate Summit that has brought more than 20 heads of state, as you actually stated, and more than 30,000 delegates, actually a huge number compared to the other Blue Economy Summit we had in this country. And this is a very positive aspect actually coming after the effects of COVID-19. And after we just had the National Steering Committee that is pushing dialogues. The dialogue that we are currently having just shows Kenyans are peace-loving people. And Kenya as a country is going to make quite a kill out of this summit. Because assume each delegate spends at least $2,000. We are going to have billions in terms of foreign exchange for the period these guys will be here. But back to what the honorable member is actually saying, I wouldn't criticize him because he actually represents what the large Kenyan population thinks about the whole discussion. And it's a call for we as leaders, we as those who really understand what this discussion is all about, to come out and sensitize people more, because really if that's what a member of parliament looks at it, and that's someone who represents majority, that then gives us a reason to sensitize the people more so that they join this call to action in ensuring that we are participating. And it's not just a boardroom discussion. We are seeing ordinary people also participating and understanding even what is this carbon credits we are talking about. Fred, people will be making money out of this. But it will be very sad if other people do not understand how they can also, be part of the money-making process.
Okay. And before we talk about the carbon credit and the discussions at the continental level or even the global stage, just from that video that we've watched, there's the basic level of what human action is and what it causes. But at that level, the MP was not very wrong. The use of the kind of fuel that you use at home, that it could contribute to the emission of greenhouse gases as well.
Yeah, actually one of the main human activities that we undertake is basically cooking and movement or transport. And in both cases, we primarily use fossil fuel. You know, since the industrial times, oil has been the major source of energy for industrialization and for transport and a lot of other human activities that we undertake. And yet oil, when it burns, you know, the byproducts are the so-called gases, and particularly greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases are basically that category of gases that have been classified as having the greatest potential or tendency to bring around that blanket around the earth and therefore prevent the heat energy from the sun to escape into the atmosphere, hence heating the sun, the earth's surface, and causing what essentially it derives its name from greenhouse. And we know what happens in a greenhouse. For those of us who have entered a greenhouse, it is usually very warm. That effect over time then causes an overall change in the average temperatures and other elements of weather that we talk about, whether it is wind, heat, temperature, and the rest of them. But you're right, Fred, the basic source or concern around greenhouse gases is the use of energy, because energy drives virtually everything that we do. So it starts with energy used for transport, energy used in manufacturing, in industry, and of course, wood fuel that is used at home, lighting systems that we use. Virtually every human activity revolving around energy use has great potential to be a contributor to greenhouse. And that is why in the case of climate change, we say it is the North or the West that is most responsible for it. Why? Because they have had this process of industrialization over a longer period of time. Even right now, almost everything they do is energy driven with huge amounts of oil and gas, and basically the industries run on that. That is why we say, yes, that is where the main source is. In Kenya, for example, we are actually a very negligible contributor to the overall impact of climate change. Actually, our emissions compared to global levels is 0.04%. The entire continent of Africa is less than 2% of overall global emissions. And if we are saying that that is the source or main source of climate change, then you can see the differential in terms of culpability or responsibility for the overall cause.
Yet we cannot sit pretty and say because our emission is negligible, then we are free to just do whatever we want. Because and still referencing from that video, the MP talked about some of the interventions, some of the alternative sources that even people at the village level are using. Talk to us about that, because still at the basic level, what kind of contribution, what kind of change can I do, can I make at my household level so that I do not contribute more towards emission of greenhouse gases?
You're very right. Sitting pretty on our laurels and saying we contribute little is no option. As President said yesterday, when the apocalypse comes, nobody will be spared. It won't know whether you are contributing less or more. Actually, indeed, those who are contributing the least are suffering the most from the impacts. And you can see this overally in the daily livelihoods of the people of Kenya in drought-stricken areas and virtually every part of the country, because where we have a lot of rain, whenever it comes, it is devastating. Even in areas like Murang'a, you see a lot of landslide and people die from those effects. When we have drought, particularly in the drier areas, arid and semi-arid lands, you can see the devastation that it causes, death of animals and all that. When it happens in some of the so-called bread basket, crops fail, and therefore we have very high costs of food. But back to your question, responsibility starts at individual level. And we said it's about the use of energy, the use of, you were just talking to your colleague about how you dispose of phones or the things that you use. So the basic thing at home, for example, is just ensure that the lights are off. Don't go for what you don't need. And we are a conspicuously consuming society. And a lot of times we also don't take responsibility for our own actions. This is a case where charity begins at home. And so the simple things that we ignore, like using energy improved jikos, for example, which essentially may cut the cost of cooking, first of all, but also has great potential to reduce the amount of fuel wood that we use. Every time you use a certain amount of fuel, some tree has been cut somewhere. So if you have that individual sense of responsibility, then you're always asking yourself, how much fuel am I going to use? How many trees am I going to? And then at that same individual level, you can ask, can I contribute to generating or producing my own fuel, which means you plant trees in the knowledge that within a few years you will be able to cut that and use it for fuel wood, rather than going into Karura forest and cutting the trees that are mature.
Talking about cutting of trees, before we go on a break, Senator, the president has come out even on the global stage as a very vocal crusader and activist on climate matters, and he's actually gaining a name, a reputation for himself. But back home, he's getting criticism for lifting that ban on logging. Even politically speaking, the Azimio leadership, Raila Odinga, talked about it in Narok at the weekend, that you are not genuine. And he was telling the president, on one hand, you're talking about climate action and climate change, and on the other, you're lifting a ban on logging.
Let me ask you, Fred. First, I would really like to commend the president for being an active champion on this matter, and he's been pushing this agenda. We even saw when last he was speaking in Paris, actually welcoming people to now the summit that we're having this week. He's brought a very interesting perspective, especially of we as Africans coming up as people who now do not want to play victims, who have a very huge opportunity to explore. And Fred, you actually listened to the president mention about the possibility of even looking at removing visa restrictions for Africans traveling across other countries. Why would we have people who are still within this continent requiring a visa to come to Kenya or go to any other African country? The moment we open up that, we are boosting trade and general interactions, and we are even now building our strength together. When Azimio actually says that the president is double speak, who says that when the president is pushing for climate action and for people to be conscious about generally what is happening, stops the provision for people to cut down trees, which is regulated because there is regulations provided for. As we are planting, there's regulations provided for under what modalities people can actually cut and replace.
Okay.
So our opponents would want to see it from one side that appeals to them, and they wouldn't want to see it from the other side also, which caters for cutting down of trees, because there's a regulation that provides for that happening.
Okay, and after the break, we'll be getting an expert's
And by
opinion
the way,
on that issue of lifting the ban on logging. Because we need to go on a break.
Just the other day, the president put to assent the Climate Change Act, which is giving provisions for very many other issues.
Okay.
Which I would like Azimio to actually amplify.
And we'll come back and take a look at that Climate Act. But that is after the break. You're watching Morning Cafe on TV47. Don't go too far. you, Fred Ndimuli. We continue with this big discussion about climate action and the Africa Climate Summit, which is on its second day at the KICC. We're still in studio with Senator Esther Okenyuri, Benson Ochieng, climate law and policy expert, and now joining the panel, John Kioli, chairperson, Kenya Climate Change Working Group. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
You've missed a huge part of the discussion, and Benson Ochieng was very kind to us. He took us through climate action, climate change, global warming 101. Yes. So at least our viewers have a basic understanding of what we're talking about. Of course, the conversation will progress. But before that, there's something that we had touched on, the issue of logging. That the president recently lifted the ban on logging, and that has come with criticism. People are questioning whether or not he's really genuine in his newfound crusade and activism in matters climate action. That on one hand, on the global stage, you're saying this, back home, you are allowing people to cut down trees. Benson.
Very well, Fred. The basic point has been made by the senator. When we say we are pursuing to deal with climate change, we don't mean that economic activity stops. Actually, the basic principle is sustainable development, which means development that meets the needs of present generation, but also takes care of the needs of future generation. And therein lies the question of balance. What kind of balance do we require to ensure that when we cut the trees, we replace them and we don't compromise, one, what we stand for, and two, how future generations are going to meet their own needs. The issue of logging in Kenya has been a vexed one. One, it has been primarily premised on roadside policies at its were. The way that it has been handled over the years, and I'm not specific to what has happened recently, is that it had been very ad hoc, not informed by clear science on the impacts, and never found premised in any law. And that is why, instead of many times it being done by the authority responsible for forest management, more often than not, it is an executive order, as we would call it, which has its own issues around how our law operates. But surprise, surprise, it has been the major mechanism for controlling deforestation in this country. And in a sense, it has worked, partly because of the system that we have already carried out our forestry. Remember from colonial days with the forest department and with the rule-oriented kind of approach to these things. And that has continued to date. So we may have issues around how these proclamations are made and how they are implemented, but the bottom line is, if we got the science right and we got the way to do it right, and we premised it in law as we should, then there would be no problem whether we lift or we impose forest ban. Okay. The current concern is whether what is going on has been informed by the right science, as Senator indicates, the right licensing procedures, and two, environmental impact assessment, because we may have the forest, but did we conduct the necessary environmental impact assessment to find out the impacts of doing that? Of course, at a general level, the concern is, on the one hand, we are talking about the need to plant more trees. In fact, I think the national commitment currently, as launched by the president, is 15 billion trees by 2032. The question is, have we put in place the right mechanisms to ensure that when this is done, it is done informed by science, it is enforced by law, and it meets our overall objective and commitment to the global community and to ourselves in terms of what we want out of this.
John Kioli, when we started this conversation, we talked about the biggest disconnect being in terms of understanding on the issues that are on the table, even the debate at the KICC currently. And a lot of Kenyan youth and a lot of Kenyans believe that what we need to do to mitigate these effects of climate change is simply plant trees. Yes. Is that it? Is that simply what we need to do?
Thank you, Fred, and I'm sorry for coming in late. I think that one of the key pillars of the summit is raising awareness, even at the continental level. You realize that we are blessed with a lot of resources. And His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Ruto, yesterday clearly told Africa that we are sitting on resources, clearly told Africa it's time to change the narrative, clearly told Africa that we are at the stage of emancipation, whereby we change the narrative of begging to realizing that we have resources. Number two, climate change has been viewed by many that it does not affect a lot. It's a narrative of the scientists. Climate change in Kenya is going with 2% of our GDP. Therefore, it's something that we should sit down and look at and realize is going with 2.5 million animals that died last 2 years in Kenya. That is livestock. That is livelihood. That is a bank account of a pastoralist. So we must look at it as, first of all, as something that will hinder our progress, that will hinder our economy. From there, then you cascade down in now unpacking it to the masses, unpacking it to the people. So climate change is affecting all the sectors. Look at tourism sector. We might not realize the full potential of our tourism sector because Kenya is potentially a nature-based destination whereby tourists come to see our wildlife, tourists come to see our beaches, tourists come to see our nature. So if it is not okay in terms of our nature, then they will not come. Mm-hmm. The agriculture sector is also affected. So we need to unpack issues of climate change from the livelihood sector, from an economic sector, that if we joke around, we are going to have a challenge. So when you look at the summit yesterday, the key pillar was unpacking it and raising awareness. Number two, the other major pillar which is connected to this was the policy dialogue. Can we as Africa look at issues from an African perspective, unpack it with Africans' solutions? Look, we have 10 terawatts of solar. That is around 3,000 hours of sunlight in Africa. So that's a solution by itself. We are sitting on geothermal. We are sitting on potential hydro. So how can we turn these to resources so that we don't continue begging and Africa becomes a wealth of resources? His Excellency the President yesterday clearly mentioned that there's a GDP that is never discussed, the potential of carbon credits. Mm-hmm. We need to change the narrative. We need to take the carbon credits business not like charcoal business. You know, charcoal business is the only business that the buyer is the one who determines the price. You come with your lorry, I put a charcoal sack in your lorry, and you ask, how much are you buying today? Mm-hmm. We need to change that narrative. We are sitting on very potential area in carbon credits, and they can only come to Africa. So let's change the narrative. Mm-hmm. Let's say a ton of carbon permit, they are saying currently is around $40 to $80. Can we say, it's you who put that term? Mm-hmm. Can we change the terms? Because we are the ones sitting on the trees.
We set the price.
Yes, we set the price.
Okay.
And that's the narrative His Excellency the President was setting.
Benson, will come back to you to explain to us this whole concept of carbon credit as well, because we want to take people slowly. But Senator, you had mentioned the issue of the amendment to the Climate Change Act of 2016. And yes, the President signed it into law last Friday, just before the summit, and it provides for transactions in carbon trading as carried out under the Act, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It also allows the Cabinet Secretary to enter into bilateral, multilateral agreements to trade carbon for emission reductions and removals for the approval of the Cabinet. And even just that language alone, that is where we lose people. Because you talked about money. And people need to understand, okay, where is this money coming from?
First, Fred, I would like to commend both the National Assembly and the Senate for really supporting the amendment. There will be subsidiary legislation now giving the specifics on how revenue will be shared. For me, I would really even be interested for the counties, because if we are sitting on money that other guys across the other continents are making, and in Kenya we are missing out, you know, we need to broadcast that aspect to encourage more people to want to know what is carbon credit, how can we make money from this whole matter. You know, when the president started talking about this issue, people were like, okay, what is the president talking about? But within no time, the moment awareness is actually done, most people will get what is being said. The other time we had a PG with the president as members of parliament, and this whole matter was explained to the members. Very interesting. After that PG, most members really embraced the whole idea and have been on the front line taking this message
Are you
back.
saying a lot of the members had no proper understanding of the issues up until that PG?
You know, let me tell you what is aired out here and the manner in which it's communicated. Most people have no clear cut line on what really it is. And you could see from what Honorable Salasia there was explaining. What is explaining literally shows how other ordinary people look at the whole issue. So until we break it down, as you said, in a simpler way, for we to get more people on board. But on the legislative bit, I would be interested, especially on the issue of revenue and what county governments and people are bound to benefit.
Yes.
If all of us get into this conversation and get to do tangible things that can actually be seen. The president launched the 15 billion tree planting target. You know, at this point then we should be asking ourselves, to what extent have other stakeholders picked this up and started implementing it? This government has given priority, especially to the, like, members of parliament who have CDF. That amendment that came up provides for more money increased in the environment sector, so that members of parliament will have more money to give to support that exercise.
Okay.
And I'm looking forward to you hosting more members of parliament here, maybe to explain what them at individual basis they are doing in their respective constituencies. This is the kind of information that ordinary mwananchi needs to hear from the different areas where they come from, so that they understand it's not a boardroom discussion, it carries them on board, and there's already provision that, you know, gives them resources to undertake whatever initiatives they are undertaking.
And as Kenyans, we love discussions about money. When it comes to money, okay, fine, we are interested. But there's that connection between what we are talking about at the KICC and where the money is coming from. Because we've seen and heard figures being bandied around. Yesterday, I think on one of the dailies are talking about 1.5 trillion. Is it shillings or US dollars that Africa is supposed to be getting within the next 7 years or so? And people are asking, okay, where exactly is this money coming from? And when Akioli here made a reference to that, talking about how much a permit, carbon credit permit, is worth or is priced. But this whole concept of carbon credit is still not something that many people understand. Where is the money coming from?
Let's explain carbon credits first before we talk about money. We start on the premise that there are what we call greenhouse gases. There are 6 or so of them. All of them are compared to the potential of carbon to cause global warming. That is why we have not gone into saying nitrous oxide credits or whatever. We use a standard gas potential to pollute, which is called carbon, because it's the most common of the greenhouse gases. So all the potential of other gases, the potential of all other gases is measured in comparison to the potential of a single unit of carbon to cause similar effects. That is where the name carbon credits comes in. So we talk of several greenhouse gases, but we talk of carbon credits, which means all of them are compared to the potential of carbon of a certain value to cause comparable impact or effect on global warming. So having said that, There are two possibilities whenever we undertake human activities, two possibilities of causing the greenhouse effect. One is we can undertake activities that avoid the emission of greenhouse gases, which means if you forgo undertaking that particular activity, you don't produce the emission. So that is a positive value in terms of carbon that is avoided. So we call it avoided carbon that would have gone into the atmosphere. But because you've undertaken that activity, such amount of carbon will not go into the atmosphere. A simple example, the use of electric cars that has now become very current in Kenya. When you use ordinary fuel, you may need a liter of fuel, say, to move, I don't know how much kilometers you can do with that, maybe 8 or so, depending on the efficiency of your engine. And even that, there could be an issue. If your engine is well serviced and efficient, you use less. If you use a certain category of oil, I see V-Power and all these regular and all that, then you have the potential to go much more distance with less carbon, which means you have avoided the propensity or the likelihood of emitting a certain quantity of carbon into the atmosphere. That is called avoidance. Then there is the other side of it, which is called sequestration. There is already carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that is why in global climate change, we talk about this magical 1.5 degrees Celsius, where we say, if we continue business as usual, then we might not be able to avoid getting over the tipping point of 1.5 degrees Celsius increase over an average increase in global temperature. The effect then is, or the consequence is, we need to find a way to remove carbon dioxide that is already in the atmosphere and sequester it, meaning tie it into the ground or store it in a certain way that it doesn't contribute to global warming. Those two situations help us to reduce carbon dioxide or help us to deal with the challenge of the quantities of carbon that will exist in the atmosphere. That is where the issue of credit comes in. It means that if you avoid, you have helped to contribute to dealing with the problem because less carbon is going into the atmosphere. If you undertake activities that remove it, for example, planting trees, because we know the science, photosynthesis, trees basically take in carbon, store it in the form of, actually the whole entire trunk of a tree is essentially carbon and carbon compounds. So when you see it that way, it is in a form that is inert, meaning it doesn't cause negative impact, it doesn't cause global warming. When that happens, it is that particular action of removing or avoiding carbon that we call credit. Just like you can go to your bank account and you say, oh yeah, it's positive credit. It is removed, so it is attributed to you. Carbon trading works this way. The amount of carbon that is avoided or that is removed is what is considered as your credit, and therefore you are certified if you want to trade it, which means if you undertake activities that avoid or removes the carbon from the atmosphere, then you are certified. You are given a certificate and you can be told your activity or project has removed this quantity, maybe 1,000 gigatons, or we are talking of big. And then my colleague was talking about the average price of carbon. Actually, there is quite some price differential because in many projects, and that is where the concern comes in. When they want to buy credits from Africa, and a lot of these are global North and Western companies that are buying, they tell you, okay, we have the money, but we want to buy from you. And we are going to buy it at $40 per ton. About metric ton of carbon dioxide. And elsewhere, when they do similar trading, they will say, I saw recently one was $120 per ton. So you can see one is 3 times.
Who is this who's buying? Because that is where probably the question is. Where is the money coming from?
It is the people with the money, the companies that want to reduce their carbon footprint, the companies that have already got certain commitments to reduce their carbon footprint because of the nature of the industry in which they operate or because of the kind of let me just say the challenge that they have given to themselves. So they want to be compliant with the global agenda, and they say yes, because we want to contribute to dealing with this issue. The other day we had, and it was even in the news, the Shell company, for example, during the last COP or the last couple of years, has committed to spending $100 billion of its resources to reduce its carbon footprint, basically through the carbon markets. They had intended to buy carbon equivalent of that. And recently, when there was a change in leadership, they said, no, we are going to suspend that, we are going a different way, that is not our priority for now. So basically, we are saying it is those companies that have got this commitment, that have made a commitment to reduce their carbon footprint, that have the money. Few of them exist in the global south, most of them are in the global north, and most of them are the multinational, the who and who in industry that you can think of.
So, John Kioli, it is actually right to say that when we plant trees, we stand to make money directly.
Yes.
The question has been that, okay, fine. They're discussing this at that level. They're making demands at that level. How does the money get down to me who has planted trees? Because that's where the question is. Most Kenyans, and I want us to bring it down there before we go back to the issue of how they're negotiating at the continental level and the global stage. How does a Kenyan, a young Kenyan who has some land and has planted a tree, access this money?
Thank you. I think that is a reason why the government came up with amendments of the Climate Change Act of 2016. Now the amendments are 2023. It had three key areas. One is to be in control of carbon credits. Before, the carbon credits agenda was free-hand. Anybody would register it, and you would hear a project is in Nanyuki,
even as
another
an
one in Mombasa, in Kwale, and some places in a forest that you are not even, the people do not even know. Because somebody came in, saw an opportunity, registered, got money, and even the community doesn't know if the money is there. Yet, this is their land. Remember, there is no idle land in Kenya. That issue of idle land is a mirage, because now it has a potential of carbon credits. So the government came up with a very clear guideline in the Climate Change Amendment Act that you must register these projects. There is a provision for the counties also to be in control. There is a provision for benefit sharing, which is very key to your question, in terms of how do you spread this to the communities? How does my grandmother realize there's something? Forget about making roads, making hospitals, making primary schools, because some of these projects, they make the primary school so that their workers can come there. It's not a benefit to the community, it's a benefit to the project. They will ensure there's a road for their vehicles to come in, not necessarily for the community. So the government pronounced itself, said, fine, let's have a benefit sharing analysis so that that money can trickle to the community. That money can translate to the owners of the land, because this is not their land. They have just come into agreement. The government has said, let's look at that agreement. Okay? We don't want to hear money came to Kenya, we don't know, and we don't see it trickling to the community. So there will be benefit sharing analysis where the communities will be in control. The second thing in the Climate Change Act, which is also very important, is the issue of how the counties can be able to connect to even issues of how they emit, how they control, and this is also encapsulated in the National Climate Change Action Plan, which was again promulgated yesterday by His Excellency the President. Remember, in the Paris Agreement in 2015, countries were called upon to cut their emissions. As much as we don't pollute much, we agreed on what was called a nationally determined contribution. So Kenya said we are going to cut 32% of our emissions by 2030. That is equivalent to 143 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. What that means is we are going back to the trees again. We said, one, we are going to amplify the trees, and that's why you hear the 15 billion trees, so that it can be able to capture that. Number two, we agreed to do renewable energy. Number three, we agreed to do energy efficiency. Number four, we agreed to go climate smart agriculture. And all these things must now translate to the Kenyan. Because we are changing the narrative that apart from climate change being a nuisance, it's also an opportunity. When you drill boreholes, when you sink dams, it creates an opportunity for water resource. It creates an amplification of agriculture so that we run away from rain-fed agriculture. So all these things must translate in the benefit sharing so that my grandmother can get a piece of the cake very clearly by the law so that we are not misused as a country.
And that's where probably the representatives of the people come in, Senator Okinyuri. If the understanding of what is happening is still at that level, where we feel that even the representatives of the people still do not understand this issue, there could be a missed opportunity. Because this link, as you say, up until now, the communities have not understood that there's money to be earned. And if at all their representatives are not alive to this discussion, that opportunity will continue being missed.
I don't think we've missed it really, because this discussion has just been intensified now, and already there's goodwill, political goodwill from the president himself and the ministry led by Honorable Soipan Tuya, who actually brought the amendment to the House. That shows there's political goodwill. And we, both the Senate and the National Assembly, by actually passing all the proposals that were in it, shows commitment to see us participate in this whole program. What is actually pending is now the parts and pieces on how every other thing is going to happen. Because like, look at the issue of revenue sharing by the county government. You know, this is not something that is just going to happen tomorrow. It will take quite some time for all those other bits and pieces that I said to be put into place. But already there is a provision for all that, and the ones that will be missing will come under subsidiary legislation. You know, some of these things you keep learning. Even when we began speaking about the women empowerment conversation, there are people who had reservations. But now the conversation, in fact, has been overemphasized. The same way we are now seeing this discussion right now about climate change and people getting to action and countries committing. At a certain point, most of the young people whom we are currently talking about being the future, at that point when the senior citizens or older generation will not be able to do whatever they agreed on right now, the young people would be carrying it forward. So some of these discussions we are having now might not just happen tomorrow or today, but we are building a long-term case for why people need to participate and understand why we are carrying this discussion. And I think the president saw this from very far, because he's been talking about this even before he was president. Kenya is largely dependent on rain-fed agriculture. The president has been urging people even before he actually decided to run for presidency, that why can't we look at other ways that don't rely on rain. Interestingly, a place like Kisii, where I come from, the rivers currently are drying. You know, what an irony that we are a highland area, but we are lacking water. You see, such issues are bringing people to the issue of, hey, we need to look at what is actually happening. Even when Honorable Salasa was saying women in the village are using firewood, in as much as people would want to critique him in the manner in which he put it, but it's the reality.
Yet the concern is because the president yesterday issued that 7.2 billion to counties for climate action. If at all the level of understanding even for the leaders at the national level is being questioned. And what about at the county assembly level, where we expect them to check the county executive in the implementation of these funds.
And let me also inform you that, Fred, the oversight role is across, not just in the county assemblies. Even by just being a member of parliament, you have to play oversight. And we cannot use one isolated case to generalize that members of parliament do not understand what is actually happening. Because we are...
You admitted
no,
that
no, no,
the level
no.
of understanding is a
You
bit
asked
wanting.
for the case of Selassie, and I was telling you that the ones who are critiquing him is the elite group, but he actually represents majority of the ordinary Kenyans out there. That's what they actually think when you mention that. So this is not a time of even sharing blame across. It's a time to actually say, now we need to carry this, because we have now bought the whole idea by even showing goodwill and passing the amendments in the houses. As members of parliament, we are really committed, and we are carrying that message down there. By the time we get to those modalities of how the different county government would be picking this up, I think we would have made quite a number of strides in that direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Benson, let's now take the conversation to what's happening at the Africa Climate Summit. And if what I'm hearing is correct, then there's a huge potential and a real potential that carbon credits and carbon trading could be a huge contributor to even a country's GDP. How much of that is, talking about Kenya's capacity, how much of this will actually factor into Kenya's economy?
Fred, yeah, the factor is potential is very huge. The only downside to the debate is we think of it rudimentarily in the sense of planting trees. We talked of certified carbon emission reductions, and those can come from various activities, including planting trees, but not really majorly planting trees, because if we go that way, then until we achieve the 15 billion trees by the time specified, we cannot compare with other countries like DRC and Gabon and the rest of them within the equatorial forests of Africa. So any activity that has got the potential to reduce or avoid carbon is a potential candidate for carbon credits. And so let's start it there, which means that we can get carbon credits for reducing emissions from projects that basically help to reduce our energy use. And I have seen recently some companies investing in improved energy, improved stoves, cooking stoves. And the potential is huge, because you can imagine that virtually the majority of households in Kenya use firewood. And if you were to develop a project that basically targets that, instead of using the large quantities of firewood in open kilns, you use maybe energy improved jikos, which then save, and then you use less charcoal or briquettes or other forms of biofuels. So so the potential is generally very huge. And in terms of natural resources, yes, you know that we have huge potential in forestry and other areas, but this has not been said a lot. The soil itself is a carbon sink, and the sea actually is one of the greatest carbon sinks. And we have a long coastline in Kenya with seagrasses and with mangroves. So when we talk of carbon credits, we need to expand our notion of the idea of where the money comes and where it can be invested in the carbon market. One of the biggest projects that have been developed in the voluntary carbon markets actually is taking place in northern Kenya with the Northern Rangeland Trust. And it is on soil carbon that you are talking about. The soil itself, and I think my colleague was talking about some form of agriculture, we call it what? Climate smart agriculture, where you basically there are various forms, conservation, tillage, where you can grow food without necessarily tilling the land. Why? Because every time you till the land, you open up the soil, and there is a lot of carbon that is stored inside that is then emitted into the atmosphere. So in developing a project like that, what you need to do is to demonstrate that ordinarily, and that ordinary level is what we call business as usual. So we say, ordinarily, this is what happens. This is the way we grow our food. We bring a tractor or we take our jembes and hoes and go to till the land. But because we are concerned about climate change, we will adopt a different system of growing our food where we don't till the land, which means then you can measure the quantity of carbon that is avoided or that is saved by failing to till. That is the one that then becomes certified carbon reduction. And the way it happens, unfortunately, the market is technical and it is run by elites. The basic thing is, when you develop a project, and I'm going this way to disabuse ourselves of this notion that I plant trees today, then tomorrow I go and look around for somebody to come and buy my carbon. It doesn't work like that. The emission reductions or certified reductions have to be done within a certain framework. There are two possible tracks. One is voluntary market, where people just say, okay, this is not regulated by the community of states or whatever. This is voluntary. Those who are willing can enter into that. Then there are people who are called certified carbon developers or verifiers. And of course,
equivalent of brokers.
Well, not brokers. These are experts who have demonstrated the ability and the integrity to be able to assess the potential for that particular investment. And there are certain rules. If you want to qualify to be a verifier, then you meet certain standards of integrity, level of expertise. Of course, they have different ways of categorizing carbon, the reductions, because they are of different levels. So basically, the first point is you must start at a baseline. I'm developing a carbon project. On today is when? The 5th or 6th of August. This is my idea. This project is going to work for this number of years. This is what I will do. If it is climate smart agriculture, you'll say, yes, I'm going to employ this kind of tillage different from the business as usual that will save or that will sequester this amount of carbon, which the verifier then comes to verify. And periodically, they will be monitoring if you really are achieving what, and then somebody will invest by simply buying that certified carbon that you have generated. It can be in various areas that help to either sequester or to avoid carbon into the atmosphere. So when that is done, and what our communities need to do is then at least, of course, as Mheshimiwa was saying, there is need to be some basic knowledge of how that market operates. And that is somehow where I have a problem with both the amendment that was recently made and with the one that is currently being legislated. There is a clearly lack of proper understanding of how carbon markets operate.
And that's the issue with education, because even Benson admits here, the kind of discussion is very technical and elitist, if I may borrow his words. For us to avoid this being a discussion and a debate purely for scientists, because the larger community and a lot of the youth right now, some of them are even looking away from higher education. Yet education should be a key component in this discussion. The fact that we may raise awareness, and the best mechanism or system to raise awareness in a community large scale is through the education system. Issues to do with climate change are rarely, I'm not sure if they're in the curriculum. Don't you think that is in itself a missed opportunity, the fact that mainstreaming of climate action as part of our curriculum?
Yeah, thanks, Fred. I think, again, I refer to the government. In the first National Climate Change Action Plan, Chapter 7, it was about climate change communication, climate change curriculum development, and again in the Climate Change Act of 2016, there is a deliberate part that talks about mainstreaming climate change in the education curriculum. I'm aware the Ministry of Education has embarked on some policies and some actions to ensure that at elementary level, I don't know what they call it today, ECD, there are poems, there are songs about climate change. And then it escalates to the primary level so that the children can make poems, they can have songs, they can have deliberate units on climate change. Then it escalates to even secondary school, where it can be mainstreamed in various courses, biology, geography, and all this. But the good thing is also at the university level, now there are PhDs on climate change, there are degrees on climate change, there are master courses. I'm a recipient of a master course in climate change, and there is a deliberate action. But going back to the community sensitization, and I think that's where the rubber meets the road. We assume a lot that the county governments are not educated. Remember, most of these chief officers, ministers of the county, they came from Nairobi. So I think most of them are quite aware about climate change. But there was a deliberate action for all the county governments to have climate change units. Not a desk, a unit, a department, whereby it has a specific officer who is aware, and then other officers around that person, so that they can implement, like the flocker that you talked about, the money that is coming to the counties that was launched yesterday. That money is going to amplify most of the things that we are talking about today, and is going to be handled by that unit, together with, of course, the policymakers at the county level. Coming up at the Senate and Parliament, Mheshimiwa has really put it very clear that now there are caucuses at the Senate and the Parliament, and National Assembly, whereby they are aware. And some of us as civil society organizations, we are partnered with the National Assembly to add more knowledge and sensitization on issues of climate change at the policy level, because learning is continuous. But if you unpack climate change as cross-sectorial, multi-sectorial, multidisciplinary, so that there is no climate change expert per se, because it touches on transport. Look, in Panama last week, there's a problem in Panama because the ships cannot cross as they did because the water level has decreased. This is an issue of climate change. It has never happened before. They used to pass about 32 ships in a day. Now they can't do that. There will be challenges in transportation worldwide. There is issues around agriculture. There is issues around forestry. There is issue around tourism. So we need people who are connected in all these sectors talking about climate change in a multidisciplinary way. So that's why I see the legislators coming in handy in looking at the policy level at an iPad's view, whereby they can look at it from different angles, not just as a complicated, because us as climate change experts, we are termed to be very complicated. But they unpack. They look at climate change like sun has come too close. We don't have river. The senator has said the rivers are drying. That is climate change. So we are looking at, my grandmother used to fetch firewood 100 meters. Now she has to go 2 kilometers to fetch firewood. Okay. What does that resonate even to issues of 80% of Kenyans who are relying on firewood and charcoal to cook? 84% of that charcoal comes to the towns. We cannot run away from it. We need to have solutions for this 84% of charcoal, 30 million cubic meters of wood that comes to Nairobi every year. Okay. What do? We need technology transfer, Fred. We need to have a conversation on technology transfer, but also we must bring private sector in the picture. They go to some Asian countries and buy solar equipment. They are given rebates by the government. They don't pay VAT, but they don't transfer that to the community. I think we are own enemies, because why do I have to buy a jiko at $40, 4,000 shillings? Will my grandmother ever afford that? Okay. It's unfair.
Okay, Senator, it would appear, and following this conversation cleanly, it would appear that most of these decisions and implementation will be down to the devolved units, the county governments, because they're in charge of implementing specific national policies on natural resources, environmental conservation, issues to do with soil and water conservation, forestry, all this. Even aspects of trade, and if we're talking about carbon trading, that's down to that means that even the role of the Senate will be key in this. Therefore, this amendments to the Climate Change Act should have emanated from the Senate as opposed to the National Assembly. It chose the wrong route.
I wouldn't want to go to the what do we call it? You know, for a long time there has been that sibling rivalry between the National Assembly and the Senate, but there are issues here which are money matters and they touch on the National Assembly. For this case, and we are very fortunate this time, we have political goodwill both in the two houses, so you haven't seen major issues really, because the two speakers are working closely, and that's why even on this matter we worked seamlessly. We didn't have issues of why did it come from the National Assembly and not the Senate. But I'm very happy that the Senate is going to play a very crucial role in this one. Even before, I've been talking about the issue, just like my other colleagues on this panel have said, the issue of not just discussing about climate change, but civic education in this country. We generally, I'm working on a bill that is giving a framework on how civic education should be conducted. You know, the moment you mention civic education, people think you are radicalizing the citizens against the government. That's not what civic education is, where you inform people. And several years down the line after we had this devolved government, we've not had any of those counties establish a civic education unit as it were required, because then they say, okay, money will be required, we have no framework. But when you look at the overall aspect, county governments are the ones that interact with people at the lowest level, at the grassroots. So if they're not able to actualize this specific aspect, then we are going to have a problem here and there. That's why I actually agree with what my colleagues are saying. There needs to be, even not just for including climate education in schools, but it goes down to the local level where the local leaders can actually talk to the people. In a country like India, students go with seedlings, planting, so even when they go back home, they're informing their parents on what they were doing. So from all these examples we are giving, you see for most of these successes we've had in other agenda that we've been pushing has been over a period of time and placing emphasis. If what we are seeing now about climate change is gonna take some time, but I'm happy that this will also strengthen the role of county governments because there are people who argue there have been discussions on changing the current law. There are some arguments on people not seeing the role county governments play. With this gives the county government and the county chiefs, those are governors, a very strong case to empower people from the very small level down there and different stakeholders who will be participating in this. You had the president actually, and I think the UK government has given some money to support local climate action that will be happening by different stakeholders. That's a step in the right direction. Because Fred, even when we began discussions about even just having county governments, there are people who didn't see this happening. Women empowerment I mentioned earlier. When it actually started, people felt this is a fight against men. But with time, people realized this is complementing the initiatives being done by their male counterparts. The climate change discussion is here. This is a moment to embrace it and join efforts in actually sensitizing other people. And I would urge my colleagues here to support me in the bill I'm working on civic education, because then it will cover all these issues. And we as Kenyans will have the patriotism to even speak passionately about some of these matters we are looking at now. Okay. And Africa generally and Kenya has a huge potential. And that's what the president is urging us to rise and take up. Okay. It will not come as an act of benevolence, but we have to come out and take up that space.
Okay, now because of time, I'll give you an opportunity to give your final words. But even as you do, I'm reminded of how the government has allowed some foreign investors to come and invest in Kenya as manufacturers, producing products here. That in itself contributes to our own increase in greenhouse emissions. Is the kind of what do we call it? The funding that we get, is it commensurate to the kind of damage that some of these investors leave us dealing with? That as you make your final submissions, Ben.
Very well. Just to disabuse ourselves of two things. Communities are very much aware of what is happening to them. They will tell you that 20, 30 years ago, this is how the situation was. We could predict the rains. We knew what to plant where. We knew when to harvest. And we knew what kind of diseases we expected during certain seasons. Not anymore, which means they can experience it, they see it, and the idea is what we need to do is to get them involved in dealing with the problem. Currently, I think in government, the biggest initiative is called Financing Locally Led Climate Action, which you saw was launched today, but it has been going for 2 years. It's a World Bank funded initiative, but there are other donors, Danish government, German government through KfW, and of course, Danida and DFID or FCDO. These initiatives are taking place, and we are saying this so that communities can know that in each ward in this country right now, there is something we call Ward Climate Change Planning Committee. In every county in this country, there is a Climate Change Act with climate change regulations and a climate change fund. In each county in this country, each county has committed to commit at least 1.5% of its development budget to climate change. In each county, there is a climate change unit with a director of climate change and a CECM appointed responsible for that docket. So a part of the civic education and knowledge that is required is that every community and every member of every community, including those who live in Nairobi and are elites, should know that at the very ward level, there is an effort to get communities to plan and to deal with this problem. So the ward climate change committees and then sub-county or county climate change planning, climate planning committees, and then in almost every county, there is an organ analogous to the National Climate Change Council. As steering committees, some have called it planning committees, some have called it policy committee, but they are there. So there is very deliberate effort towards doing that under the framework of FLOCA, and a lot is already going on at the ground level.
Okay, thank you so much. John?
Thank you very much for the opportunity and for TV47 to get an opportunity for climate change. Most of the TV stations are just on politics. So I think, as you had asked, in the first document that the Ministry of Environment did, the National Climate Change Response Strategy in 2009, the Climate Change Act of 2016, the National Climate Change Action Plan, they are all of them talk about development in a low carbon pathway, meaning that we appreciate we must develop, but let's develop in a low carbon pathway. Starting from procurement, starting from construction, let's have green buildings, let's do efficiency in factories, and it's an opportunity for those factories to also do the issues around climate change as they produce. Kenya is blessed with 70% youth. They are very focused. They need to be given opportunities, especially in technology transfer, in issues around ICT, in issues around climate smart agriculture. And that is a potential that is not utilized, that we need to do. And that way, we can deal with climate change easily, because that's the future of this country.
Thank you. Senator, anything to add? I know you had really taken your time. 30 seconds or so.
No, maybe place emphasis on the role of young people. And I actually see the UNSG, Antonio Guterres, talking about young people a lot and their involvement in the climate change discussion. I think for Kenya, Kenya is already showing some positive positive support to the young people who are engaged in this discussion. But then I would urge for more involvement, especially for the young people at the grassroots level, so that it's not just an elite young people discussion, but other ordinary young people who've not had access to education can pick it at that low level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Senator Esther Kenyuri, John Kioli, Chairperson, Kenya Climate Change Working Group, and Benson Ochieng, Climate Law and Policy Expert, for helping us understand this not very simple conversation. And thank you for helping us and breaking it down for our viewers to understand what exactly we're talking about at the KICC, even as the Africa Climate Summit continues. And ladies and gentlemen, you'll allow me to read this editorial comment as we wrap up this session. As Kenya takes the lead in hosting the inaugural Africa Climate Summit, it is an opportune moment to reflect on the role that the continent's youth play in addressing the pressing issue of climate change. The summit represents more than just another international gathering. It is a critical moment for African youth to assert themselves as vital stakeholders in shaping the continent's sustainable future. The growing youth population is both a tremendous asset and a potential liability in the face of climate change. Their energy, creativity, and determination can drive innovative solutions, but their vulnerability to the impacts of climate change also places a heavy responsibility on their shoulders. It is incumbent upon governments to harness their potential and engage them meaningfully in climate conversations. First and foremost, African youth must recognize that climate change discussions extend far beyond just environmental concerns and tree planting. The summit includes critical aspects of economic development, social equity, and international cooperation. It provides a platform for African nations to negotiate funding for climate adaptation and mitigation, collaborate on technology transfer, and advocate for their unique climate challenges. African youth need to understand that their participation in these discussions is not merely symbolic, but can influence policies that shape their future. For this to work, education is key to bridging the knowledge gap. Schools and universities should incorporate climate change education into their curricula, emphasizing the local and global relevance of climate issues. This will equip young Africans with the knowledge and skills to engage meaningfully